Andrew, look, again, I want to thank you for participating in this. The ultimate aim here is a feature-length documentary. That would be ideal because there is so much information in this Beaumont case, and there is a lot more to it than the 3 children that went missing. Obviously, that is, of course, a major disaster, a tragedy, and I'm not trying to downplay that, but there are other factors or issues within this case, primarily revolving around the types of people or the individuals who were involved. For the benefit of the viewers, can you give us a bit of a rundown on what actually happened on Australia Day, January 26, 1966, to those 3 Beaumont siblings? This is information and events that occurred before many of the viewers were even born. So can you give us a rundown what occurred? Glenelg Beach, where is it? What was the background and what occurred during the course of that fateful day?
I've written an extensive statutory declaration on what I saw. I don't talk, I can tell you what my sisters saw, or what we discussed amongst ourselves, what my father was saying. But basically what happened was, Tony Munro and all of our dive mates, us kids and that, we were going to go down and dive on the old destroyed jetty that was destroyed in a storm that came up from the Arctic in 1948, wiped out the best jetty that South Australia will ever have.
And that's on Glenelg Beach?
Glenelg Beach. The jetty was replaced in 1967, 1 year after the Beaumont's disappearance. The jetty was put in. We'd been diving there for a couple of years, or 2 summers, and there was lead ballast, there were brass portholes from the Dolphin Aquarium, if anybody's familiar with it, telescopes, hundreds and hundreds of coins. We just fan the sand and there's all these coins on there like jewellery. And Tony would take Bruce Larwood, there was Peter Slade, myself, and we'd all be down there, and we did quite a lot of diving there. Well, what was going to happen was, on Australia Day, which wasn't a public holiday by the way, it was in the middle of the week, it could have been a Wednesday, something like that, and it was all arranged. And Tony wouldn't do anything without running it past my father. Tony pulled up in the driveway, Bruce Larwood was sitting next to him, Clinton, his cousin, was in the back seat, and they were going around to pick up Peter Slade, who lived just over Crossroads, a few kilometres from our house in Edwardstown. And I had my gear in my hand, a towel. We didn't know about hats and sunglasses back then, and we were just going to have a normal day down at the beach like we normally do. We were the underwater exploration and survey group. We all had our little broidered tags. Tony was a great bloke in some ways, but he was also a pedophile. Anyway, even at that stage, he wasn't a Boy Scout leader. He was about 20 years old by then. And I stood in the driveway. Tony he walks up towards me and he says, "Oh, Andy, you can't come with us because you're not old enough."
You would have been about 10 at the time?
12.
12, okay.
You're not old enough.
Not old enough, that was his reasoning.
I'd been diving with Tony and Bruce for 2 years. We're away every weekend. We went all over the place.
So he would have known that you were an experienced diver?
I was.
Yes.
I was very accomplished by the time I was that age. And so I burst into tears and walked off. And my father may have come out and spoken to Tony, I don't know. And they left. Now, before that happened, my father had given me 3 different stories. We got up, it was going to be a stinking hot day, my mother wasn't there, she'd gone to work. My father didn't have his Mark II Zephyr that had been loaned out, didn't have it. His friend Alan Knight came over in an old 46 Buick, or could have been a Pontiac, and picked him up that day. But anyway, this is what happened. You're going to go down with Tony and Bruce, etc., and I'm going with Colin Eames and all my friends, who are all about 16, 17, to the Port Noarlunga Reef and dive on the reef there. You could walk off the jetty at Port Noarlunga and dive. That's what's happening. Then it changed. Something else changed, that it's amazing I can remember this, but I can, like, as clear as it was yesterday. Then he told me that, and why he had to tell me these things I don't know. He told us that they weren't going to Port Noarlunga, they were going down to dive on the jetty site at Glenelg. And this really spun me out, because he was moving in on our patch with all of his mates. He was going to take over. This is what he does. He was just going to take over, finding the treasure and all the stuff. You realise I'm only 12 years old. So that's what was going to happen. Then it changed again, where I was staying home. He was going, and when he left, I watched him walk down the driveway towards Alan Knight's car, which could have had Wayne Brown driving, borrowing it from Alan Knight. He got in the car, he only had his bathers and a towel, nothing else. No skin diving gear. There was no skin diving going to be done by my father. It wasn't going to happen. So I was sent to the shed, no water, no food, and it was stinking hot, and I cleaned the shed up like you know, my father was a very untidy person, so I spent hours cleaning up the shed. Now, he came back early afternoon, I reckon, or it's hard to say, I didn't have a watch, could have been as late as 2 o'clock in the afternoon. And he walks up, he'd already been home, he'd already had a conversation with my sister Ruth about the good thing he'd done, and how he'd been talking to these 3 children, and he'd taken them to Wenzel's bakery, and he'd given them a £1 note. That was to stitch up the Phipps person, by the way.
Harry Phipps?
Harry Phipps, yes. He's always been a suspect, because Max made him look like a suspect. I gave the children a £1 note, and they bought some food, and then I dropped them off at the bus stop. That was his story.
Who gave you that story?
Ruth, my sister.
Okay.
I didn't even know he was home. He didn't bother to come out and pick me up. I don't know really how long he was home. But Ruth told me he came home covered in blood. But he was euphoric. Like, he obviously been involved in some injured child, murdering a child, or murdering somebody, or cutting the throat of a sheep, or something like that. He had blood all over him. So he goes up and washes the blood off, and he throws his bloody clothes in the clothes basket, and then he came out and picked me up. He told me I could come inside. I walked in the back door, and there's a rattling at the front screen door, and Tony Munro's there bawling his eyes out. He's a grown man, he's 20 years old, and he's having a meltdown. He came in off to the right, he walked through into the kitchen. He went up and he said something in my father's ear, and my father rocked backwards. He went like this, shit, 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 and he rocked backwards and forwards on his feet. And then he started barking out orders to Tony to get stuff. He opened the knife and fork drawer and grabbed a heap of stuff. He said, go out and get all my skin diving gear ready and put it in the boat. I didn't know what was going on. And then...
But you did witness them having this interaction, this conversation.
I did. Yes, and so did my sister Ruth, who gives the same story. Claire didn't talk much, she knew what was going on. And so all this commotion, and then Ruth ordered up to her room. I don't think Claire was even there, I don't know where she was. And I had to sit in my parents' room on their bed, and I just looked into the mirror for a while, nothing to do. Everybody did what they were told. When you're a child, you didn't question anything, or you'd get a thick ear. Our father used to beat us without warning, even if we hadn't done anything wrong. It was conditioning. He'd beat the crap out of us. No reason. So anyway, I sat there. They hadn't been gone long. Couldn't have been any more than 15 minutes, so I would say. Came back, the white Zephyr turns up. Tony parks his car, because I could see through the window. Tony parks his Lever and Kitchens light yellow 1965 station wagon in front of our neighbour's house, Mr. Elsegood's house, just north of our house by the next house next door. And I turn around, my father walks into the bedroom with Tony behind him, and he's as white as a sheet. He's trying to talk, but he can't talk, and he looked like he was going to pass out. I'd never seen him that way in my life. Now, I'd say he already knew what had happened, but now he was going to get caught. He went into panic mode and he panicked. Tony Munro's calmed down by now, and he's saying, take the sheets off the bed, get the sheets in the alcove, get Andrew out of here. So Tony reaches past him and rips me off my feet and tries to drag me through the house. Now I was pretty strong for a 12-year-old, and Tony Munro's never been a big bloke. So he was only marginally slightly stronger than I was. And he managed to drag me through the laundry onto the back, and I broke away from him and I ran back in. He grabbed me. This happened 3 or 4 times till he was wearing me down, and he dragged me out the back and he made me stand down the back under the big almond tree on the back lawn. It was a very big block. It was a quarter acre block. Then he proceeded to run backwards and forwards from the shed, piling skin diving gear, my father's aqualungs, etc. Not a lot of people had them then. And I was watching, behave him, doing what I was told, because he came up to my face and he went, you will stay here, you will do what I tell you. This is what they used to do to children, and you were like frozen. You did exactly what you was told. Until eventually I thought, I'll stuff this, and I bolted.
You're standing at the front of the house observing what's going on. You saw people in suits stopping traffic on the roadway.
Yes.
Would you say they were, I'm assuming they're detectives or police officers or someone from officialdom?
Either they were from a funeral home and nobody had knew that the Beaumonts had even been abducted, or they were dead yet, so you can count that out. They were detectives, and they were directing traffic away from Macklin Street. My father had been standing at the back of the boot, and this is my sister Ruth told me. He went to the back, lifts the boot, he shows my 2 sisters dead children. They had blood in their hair. One of them looked like their hair had been cut or changed, but it was probably the blood in the child's hair that was making it look different.
Which 2 sisters saw the dead bodies in the boot
Both of
car?
them.
So that would have been Ruth and Claire.
Ruth and Claire.
Yes.
My sister explained this to me in great detail, that she thought like one of them being done up like a tin soldier, like with makeup on, etc. Well, this could have been the case, because there's another story to this of what I've been told by other witnesses. But it could have been the stage of decay, blotching in the skin due to being dead, any of those things. But anyway, my sister Claire was asked to get her brush, and she went out and she was brushing the sand and blood out of the children's hair. I'll go back to that later. And Ruth was standing, she had to stand there and watch as well. And he went to the back seat and he pulled out a little piece of paper and he took the little boy's penis, Grant's penis out. It had been severed. Ruth said he had blood on the front of his pants. And he proceeded to get his filled bag, because he used to like doing surgery, takes out a needle and thread and starts to stitch the little boy's penis back on. This is fact. And this I didn't see because I was still being kept down in the backyard.
So these are things that your sisters
Yes.
said they witnessed, although
Yes.
you didn't personally.
Claire always kept her mouth shut, but Ruth used to talk to me. She told me. And so by the time I ran out the driveway, and by the way, the blood in their hair could be because John Pike, who was helping to have Tony Munro jailed, was also interviewing my father Max, but he was doing a covert operation where he was really letting my father know what we knew, but he was also letting us know what my father was saying, hedging his bets. And my father told him that Tony Munro took a .22 rifle and shot the 3 children in the head, shot them in the head. Before I went to this trip a couple of weeks earlier to Kangaroo Island with Tony, Bruce and Clinton, my father took my .22 rifle. It was a Winchester repeater, it had a silencer. His rifle, he didn't have a silencer on his rifle. So he took mine. I didn't get it back for years, and I was stuck with his, which I didn't like. So he had my rifle with a silencer on it at the time. This could link into why I didn't get my rifle back for a long time. Tony didn't throw his rifle away. He was still using it when he went for a trip with John Pike down the southeast with his rifle a year later. If he had have shot anybody with his rifle, he would have thrown it over the side of the boat, because they could match up ballistics back in those days. So there's a lot there that I'm telling you, but I'm trying to keep it as simple as possible. So I race out. I've been kept down the back. I've been dragged out of the house by Tony. I'm watching him load up the boat with all my father's skin diving gear. I decided to make a break for it and ran past Tony and headed for the front. My father was dragging the boat out of the driveway from behind the house with incredible feat of strength, pulling this thing out without a jockey wheel, pulls it onto the road and puts it on the back of the car. I don't know how he did it physically. And then he said, "What's he doing here?" "That's me." "Take him down to Bruce's." And Tony replied, "Bruce is not here. Take him with you." So I was dragged off, tossed into Tony's car, the front of his Lever and Kitchens Holden station wagon, and the seat was all sticky. I was sitting in a seat covered in blood clots and blood. It had started to look like Vegemite, so it wasn't fresh. It was a hot day. I was sticking to the seat. There was sand on the seat as well, and there was sand all over the floor. He drove me down to his mother's place where he lived, down at 2 Todd Street, Glenelg, where he dragged me out of the car, did the old "you will stand here" to my face and made me stand there while he went inside, got a 2-gallon bucket, some detergent. He was a rep for Lever and Kitchens, and a cloth, and he fastidiously cleaned this car. Tony, one thing about him, he kept things clean. His personal hygiene was excellent, his car was excellent, and it was a mess. He cleaned it up. The bucket's full of blood. He goes and gets rid of that, and he takes me inside, tells me to stand in the lounge room, and he disappears. Then he came back with my little suitcase, and out of the blue, at a minute's notice, I was being taken into the bus depot in Adelaide and sent up to stay with my auntie and uncle for 2 weeks at Loxton.
So on that day, both your father's car, that is Max McIntyre, and Tony Munro's car, they both had blood and sand in them.
Yes, his boot would have had blood and sand and 3 dead children in there.
And then there was the blood on the front seat, the passenger seat.
Tony's car. This may explain the little boy may have bled to death there on the front seat.
It was a significant or substantial amount of blood.
Oh yeah, about all the blood that would probably come out of a small child. And it was pretty, I only worked out what was really going on as an adult, because I used to go hunting with some friends from the H&C, and I used to catch rabbits and everything, and I know how the blood goes brown after a certain amount of time. I know these things because I used to go hunting.